Okay, well, just wanted to thank everyone who's able to join in, and we're recording the meeting. So for those of you who hear this at a later date, we hope that you enjoy this presentation from Russ Porter. The plan is to have folks input their questions in the chat area, and then at the end of the presentation, Russ will kind of go through the list of questions and answer them one at a time. If we get some additional folks in here and we run out of time, Russ's contact information is available, and he said he'd be happy to take your questions that way. So, Russ, I will hand it over to you and let you get started.
Wonderful. Can everybody hear me? I guess my feedback on that is John or Doug or Jen or Brian telling me that they can hear me. Just to do a quick sound check, am I sounding okay?
Good to go for us.
Wonderful. Good. Great. Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to present the eye-to-eye Inception to implementation model. Before I start, we do have to do some big thank yous for all of the individuals at the center, the Next Generation Photovoltaic Center, those who have already been in operation for over 5 years, Brian, Sampath, Kurt, the site directors, as well as Brian, the center director, and John for all the work he does on the administrative side. Also, my proposed co-director, Dr. Robert Baylog, who has really been an individual that I've learned from, and hopefully I've been able to help him have some more extensive understanding of the research model that I'm going to be doing. And Dr. Baylog has really been a big part of this as well, so I need to mention him. And to give a big perspective in terms of how the Texas A&M system works, I just give a brief synopsis. We have actually Texas A&M College Station, and that is considered the Texas A&M proposed NSF balance of system site that we are working on to join the center, and also Texas A&M University Central Texas, which is where I'm physically located. Both Dr. Baylog and myself, although we sit in two different universities, we're in the same system, and we're actually joined by the Texas A&M Engineering Experimental Station, or known as TEAS. And so we're actually using TEAS assets, so we need to say a big thank you to all three of those organizations that are represented under the proposed Texas A&M site. With all that said, I'm going to be going pretty quickly on these slides. So if you can bear with me, again, questions as you put them up, we really appreciate those. And if I don't get to all of them, then definitely we'll be able to use my contact information as indicated by John. So why are we doing an eye-to-eye inception to implementation model for the balance of system solar research? The inception to implementation comes about in terms of individuals who are trying to help support all of the research that's being done in the solar energy industry. And I am working on even a larger visionary type of solar research project here at Texas A&M Central Texas with an individual who is using the same kind of model with public-private enterprise, but without the NSF component, and not as many universities involved. So I've been involved in the last 3 years on looking at this model, and we're really looking forward to coming on as a site to work with UT Austin and also Colorado State University. To give you a big perspective on big data, structural equation predictive analysis, that we're going to be using for encompassing all areas of solar research, there are two types of big data. People say, I'm going to work on big data, and that's great. There are really two types. One has a significant amount of data that is actually used within the assessment of different models, different concepts, however it's looked at, in terms of actual storage capacity. We're looking at gigabytes or even terabytes and beyond of particular types of data. And in the history industry, I'll call it an industry, those who work in history, sometimes when they work with data tapes, they need to use those large big data type of assessments. So an individual colleague here at Texas A&M University Central Texas, Dr. Luke Nichter, he has large data sets for his books on the Nixon tapes, and I've been fortunate to actually watch him use those data tapes, and he's really using large amounts of storage. However, he doesn't have a lot of variables per se that he's looking at. My realm of big data is totally different. I look at significant amounts of data, big data, in terms of large N numbers of observations, which may not be a lot of storage, but when you start getting up to over 1 million observations and hundreds of variables, then you need to know how to work with a big data type of predictive analysis. So to kind of put that in perspective, our big data that we're going to be presenting has a significant amount of variables. We currently have 319, as we indicate in the slides, and we're going to, in all probability, especially if we have the utility data involved, we're going to be talking about millions of observations. So as we get into the actual slides, it'll become more apparent that it is big data. I'm not the only one working on this particular research endeavor. I have a co-PI, Dr. Jeff Kirk. I'll be presenting him as well as myself in terms of our background, so you get a little better understanding of where we're coming from. And we're going to be working with folks both at College Station, postdocs, as well as Texas A&M University, Central Texas, and TEAS. Moving on to the second slide then, a little bit about my background and my co-PI. Obviously, I'm not going to go over all of this, but to give you a background in terms of our education and our experience. My experience has primarily been in healthcare and education when it comes to big data. And using those analogies of the peer-reviewed articles and the government documents that we've been able to produce in terms of outcomes for scholarship, we're bringing those types of experience into the solar industry to look at and focus on all of the things that are part of the balance of system, which is exactly what the Texas A&M focus is on, the balance of systems within the solar industry. In terms of research and healthcare, I've been in that area since 1985, education since 1990, and as I've indicated in renewable energy, specifically solar, in the last 3 years, helping to develop this eye-to-eye model so that we can use that to look at all of the types of research that are in solar. I have some specific types of field-based research also using big data that is highly adaptable to the solar industry when it comes to glass optics. And so I have in my past research that is going to be help guiding some of the research we're doing. And if you're at all interested in some of the big data outcomes in terms of the actual scholarship, I'm more than welcome to share that with you. In terms of my co-PI, Dr. Kirk, he's an individual who's also a statistician of the first caliber in terms of looking at big data analytics. He most recently helped me with an educational big data assessment that we did 6 of our universities within the Texas A&M system to predict student success, and have done that in the past. And I look forward to working with Dr. Kirk on this particular project as well. In terms of the actual eye-to-eye and the inception to implementation for solar energy, want to concentrate on the summary here. The eye-to-eye structural equation solar energy research project is really going to be looking at those individuals who have an idea, that have an inception on how it can help implement an improvement in solar energy using the balance of system variables that we have. And specifically, those 319 variables, at least to date, that we're going to be representing in the 5 concepts. Now, I just want to take a little moment here and kind of step away from the executive summary slide there and really talk a moment about some of the interaction I've already had with the center folks in terms of why do we need to do this. Sampath up at Colorado State University, I hope he's here, and he may be able to jump in with a question or two. But in my discussion with Sampath and why we're doing this is we really have to concentrate on the reason for why any solar energy is being assessed. We currently use fossil fuels for the majority of our energy sources, but if you put that in context, all of that's going to be gone, no matter how you look at it, in the next 2 generations. And so for my aha moment in terms of why I look at at doing this research and why I spend my time on doing it is I want to give to my grandchildren a model that hopefully keeps the quality of life at the same level that we have. Because quite frankly, if we don't find an alternative source, I don't know how fossil fuels is going to continue beyond the next 2 generations. So back to slide 2. Beyond the aha moment of why we're doing this is to look at how can we bring the balance of system solar research to help what is already being done and enhance in a research technology term is called the interactive effect. Why are we putting all these things together? So first of all, we need to talk about the actual concepts. We'll have a model for you in the next slide, but just to kind of get through the particular concepts themselves, we want to look at what kind of technology teams are predictive towards the solar outcomes in terms of the technology and the costs, which I'll present there as the fourth and the fifth concepts. So the specific kinds of individuals working in solar energy, the engineers, the chemists, the technologists in the field, the people who help bring the panels to the field, etc. And along with that is the funding streams. How do we actually pay for all of the solar energy? The second concept is the collection technology, an area that I have done some previous research in specifically is in how do we actually collect the solar energy? What kind of glass clarity do we have? What kind of coating do we want to have? We may not necessarily want to have 100%. One of the things that Dr. Balog is working on is looking at, as an example, in where I just recently went to Qatar, where he's at, in terms of looking at how can we use solar as a means of solar collection for energy source, but also use it as a mechanism to decrease the amount of heat that's coming from the glass and having it as a coating that is refractive. And so, it cuts two ways. So those kinds of collection technology is important. Where most of the research is being done, at least what I've been able to determine in the last 3 years, is it's in the conversion technology, the mono versus polycrystallines. And I'll get into some of the more specific types of variables we're going to look at the last slide. The technology outcomes. So for example, one of the smaller projects we're doing within the TIMU site is to look at both the inverter issue with the grid, going from the solar energy and converting it into the grid. I know Colorado State's doing a wonderful job up there with their 26,000 solar panels helping out with their particular university. What we're going to look at here is a small micro framework in terms of a small 3 kilowatt non-grid battery storage. And so length of battery life is important in terms of technology outcomes. We have added a component to the technology outcomes that is not being looked at in the solar research to any great extent, but in defense of the solar researchers, it's not really being looked at very well in the other energy sources themselves either, as the carbon imprint and other types of global imprint that we have. And the last part is the costs. It's very important, obviously, on the costs is why are we even doing solar energy? As the fossil fuels continue to increase, with the exception of some areas where fracking is extremely involved, the cost is going to go up no matter how we look at it with our fossil fuels. So eventually we want to have that cost parity, and when will it approach parity? And in some cases it already is in the utility area. The utility use of solar energy has already found parity with some of the other types of energy sources, but it hasn't occurred in business and it hasn't occurred in the residential. So we need to be very specific in the types of variables we're assessing, including not only the residential and business, but how are we going to approach the utilities and help them. So each of those 5 concepts are assessed in terms of the relationships of the concepts upon the other concepts. Why do we do that? I'll explain a little bit more when I actually get into what we call confirmatory factor and structural equation modeling. Excuse me, in terms of the relationships, because that's important to determine what variables we then look at in those specific relationships among variables. So the entire structural equations model is a paring down effect from those 319 variables, basically what I call the spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks, is that we want to look at, out of those 319, what do we need to pare down to start with, say, the top 10 to 20 variables to really help guide the future research. That doesn't mean we discount all the rest of the 309 variables. It just means in terms of the resources that we have and also the time that we have, that we concentrate on those particular predictors that have the most effect in terms of technology outcomes, global imprint, and costs. At the very end of slide 3, we anticipate at least 900,000 observations with those 319 variables and those 5 concepts. And moving on to slide 4. So obviously we want to be industry relevant. The entire solar industry is impacted from this model in terms of the inception of a new idea to implementation of that idea as compared to how do we input that in the current solar energy balance system. How we impact the actual industry is the technology outcomes hopefully are enhanced from the research in terms of guiding the research with the highest amount of predictive ability, and the global imprint and solar costs being reduced. So in terms of the current balance of system, if you look on the left-hand side of slide 4, the balance of system research and development currently looks at those particular concepts within that entire entire graph. And you have, for example, who's advocating for the balance of system and specifically the solar energy. The builders, the distributors involved, the utilities obviously have a large impact currently. To inspectors, the entire power electronics behind it, the electrical equipment, and the actual PV modules themselves, where we're currently concentrating on the majority of solar energy. Rack and mounting, 10,000 pieces of manufactured products that go into just putting a rack and mounting in place. And the smart grid itself, in terms of how do we enhance the grid as we bring the solar energy. So that entire balance of system research and development graph basically is the eye to eye, excuse me, solar energy model. So the eye to eye, or we all want to see eye to eye on this, structural equation model has over 319 variables that we've identified in a list that I can provide to anybody until the actual research starts. Once the research starts and we have the data that has non-disclosure, then we have to keep it within the center. But until that time, I'd love to share the model and anybody that's interested. The eye-to-eye model was actually based on a rational contingency theory where basically Klusny and Vini back in 1980, and I replicated it over 20 years ago, says we have inputs, they go through throughputs, and they have outputs very succinctly. In this particular model, we're looking at the technology team and those funding variables. How do we collect the actual solar energy? How does that impact both of those two concepts and all the representative variables on the conversion technology to impact technology outcomes, global imprint, and solar variable cost as indicated earlier? So in terms of the statement of work, typically what we want to look at in a research model and a research methodology is why are we doing this? What's the statement? Our overview is both myself and Dr. Kirk have structural equation modeling background, and we're bringing that framework to the center. We want to help the center in terms of all of the research that's being done by the PIs at UT Austin, Colorado State University, Texas A&M, Texas A&M Central Texas, and the Colorado School of Mines, who have been part of this project. And I do want to say thank you to Ruben, who has been part of this over the last year and helping all this come together, is that at Colorado School of Mines, is that the eye-to-eye research really will be bringing over 100 research projects into a cohesive balance of system model. Now, not all 100 research are currently in place, and that's where we're heading in terms of having all the data come together. But in addition to the data as well, we want to do a meta-analysis of the literature to help guide the research model as we put it all together. The research model is indicated in slide 5 on the 5 concepts. I've already gone over all those. Is they're going to be assessed individually in what's called confirmatory factor analysis. We're going to be using Lisral software, which is the most precise the most precise structural equation modeling software that's available. It's been out over 30 years, created by Joris Cog and Sorbum. I was fortunate enough to learn under one of the individuals that learned from Joris Cog and put this together in a very valid and reliable model to bring each of those concepts that are done at the confirmatory factor analysis individually to a structural equation model where we can actually look at those relationships among the concepts to guide us in the specific variable to variable relationship that we actually do using ANOVA. And the ANOVA is what most researchers understand a little bit better than the structural equation. Moving on to slide 6, in terms of the research methodology, after we're done with the structural equation modeling, which I'll explain in a timeline in just a little bit, once it's complete, then we actually look at the predictor variables to be assessed against the outcome variables on a variable to variable relationship. So again, it pares it down so that we can find out which ones do we need to concentrate on first, not completely discounting all the other variables that researchers are going to be looking at, but to put an emphasis on those that have the greatest predictability compared to all the other variables that are being assessed. And so what we'll be able to do is determine what variables have the greatest impact upon the technology outcomes, global imprint, and the cost, and then using ANOVA to really determine what are the demarcations. For example, what kind of glass type should we really be using at, or what kind of coating on the glass, etc. And how does that impact kilowatt per hour costs? Those preliminary outcomes, both in the confirmatory stage as well as the structural equation stage, will be distributed immediately to the site directors and the co-directors for review to help them support their future research. Again, this is a framework where we have limited resources and limited time, so this 30,000 foot level, as Dr. Balog likes to call the model, actually helps structure the future research in those different universities. The infrastructure to perform the research really is going to be the time that is consumed by myself and Dr. Kirk working with a PhD postdoc engineer, and as well as some graduate students at the master's level to help with literature and some of the mathematical modeling that we're going to be using as part of the structural equation and confirmatory factor analysis. The preliminary results in the past similar projects that we've done, as I've indicated, we've published these, and they're available in the two different industries of education and healthcare to kind of give you a framework on what we're going to be doing is out there. But to our knowledge, including Dr. Balog, who's been in the field in the solar industry itself as well as academia, has indicated that there's really not anybody else doing it, looking at it this way. That might be something that we could look at psychologically. Why are we doing it? But I think more importantly, in terms of the individuals that we're going to be helping guide the future research, is it's very important so that we use the limited resources that we have, the limited funds from NSF as well as from the actual industry itself, that we guide in a very value-added mechanism from an economical perspective. Moving on to slide 7, we're actually going to get into some of the specific research methodology so you have a little understanding of what structural equations and confirmatory factor analysis is really about. In terms of the first phase, as our site comes up in operation, we're going to be discussing with the PIs. Obviously, we're going to continue to have that discussion as we also have our weekly meetings within the center, is to ask the PIs that we have their raw data. Now, in a non-disclosure environment, it's up to them to provide that raw data. It may not necessarily be that every PI does provide the raw data. There may be proprietary issues where it just won't be appropriate, and we can all work with that type of arrangement. But when we presented this at the proposal meeting back in June at College Station, Texas A&M College Station, it really was a situation where people bought into the model because we want to determine how can we help each of our PIs with their particular research, and how does it fit into the bigger data set. So we're going to be asking each of the PIs to provide the raw data. It'll go into an actual big data research set, and all data will then be reviewed for any transcription errors, reaching back out to the PIs to make sure we did it correctly, checking for traditional skewness, kurtosis, any outliers, and putting that into one big data set. How it actually works when we get into assessing beyond the data review of the raw data is to put in what's called a confirmatory factor analysis. Each of those 5 concepts will be assessed individually with what is used in the big data environment of research called confirmatory factor analysis. To get into the specifics of it, we're going to have both what's called an exogenous or predictor variables, and endogenous or outcome variables, and exogenous concepts or predictor concepts, and endogenous or outcome concepts. To start with our predictor variables, which are representing the predictor concepts, we have what is called our predictor concept formula, and that large X is equal to our formula where we do have lambda x is equal to lambda x xi plus delta. Now, not going into all of the matrix algebra that's involved behind all of this, essentially what we're doing is xi is the actual exogenous factor concept that is created from those actual data that we're assessing. In essence, in the structural equation modeling and confirmatory factor modeling narrative that we discuss it's called a latent concept. It's not assessed in its own raw form. It's assessed through all those variables representing that concept. If you have any background in factor analysis, if you've done factor analysis, and I've taught this confirmatory factor analysis and structural equation modeling before, typically you want people who have had at least factor analysis to try to do this kind of research, and in essence you are factor loading those particular variables upon that concept. What is so powerful about confirmatory factor analysis and structural equation modeling is the errors that may correlate. For those of you who know multiple regression, to kind of get back into a more traditional mode, when you have a formula for multiple regression where Fy, the independent variable, is impacted by the dependent variables, I'm sorry, go backwards. The dependent variable is impacted by the independent variables, Fy is equal to x1 plus xn, you have this little thing called an E at the end, or error. Well, in essence, what confirmatory factor analysis does is it allows that error term to be on each of those variables. And not only does the error become assessed with each of those variables, but we can then correlate those particular error terms as well. So what you're assessing is what's called full parameter analysis with all those error terms. You do the same thing with your endogenous outcome variables and your endogenous concept to allow those errors to correlate. And when that happens, that's when those error terms actually change the statistical significance of those particular factor loadings of those variables upon the concepts. And when that occurs, then you have the power of correlated errors helping you drive what variables stay in that particular confirmatory factor analysis outcome. Now, pundits might say that this is a big fishing expedition and you're allowing the statistics to drive the entire model. I listen to them and I say, you have a point. What we have to be very careful about is using a model or a theoretical framework to ensure that we're doing something that's valid, validity being the fact that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. The reliability comes about from making sure that valid model, that valid theory, has been tested. And in my case, at least in experience-wise, I've done 5 large big data assessments over my career, and we do find out that sometimes those correlated errors do have to be definitely looked at very carefully to ensure that we have a valid and reliable outcome. So I do listen to the individuals who do question this entire framework, but there are many individuals doing the same kind of research using big data assessments, especially with confirmatory and structural equation modeling. So I'm going to move on to slide 8. where we actually talk about structural equation modeling. Once those confirmatory factor analysis are done for each of those concepts, we then put it into one large model. That large model being the structural equation model to determine what are the relationships among those particular concepts that we just completed with confirmatory factor analysis. The full model for the structural equation model is there in the Greek form of eta equals beta eta plus gamma xi plus zeta. Now, not getting again into the matrix algebra of all these particular vectors in these particular matrices, what I want you to come away from is this model, and the power of this model is not only do we find the correlated errors within the particular confirmatory factor analysis outcomes, but when we look at the structural equation modeling, we can then look at the full parameter analysis of the correlated errors within not only the particular concepts themselves, which is very important in terms of looking at the errors of the concepts, which is unique, not just the variables of the variables, the errors of the variables, but the errors of the concepts, is that we can look at the errors of the relationships among all of the variables that come together in the structural equation modeling, as well as the errors within the concepts. And that's the power of structural equation modeling. So when we find the correlated errors, and we find those that are statistically significant, because we keep it at a statistical significance model level, is we say that we then can pare these down from, say, 319 down to about 20 to 30, because that's traditionally what we have found. About 10 to 20% of the variables fall out, is then we find those relationships among those particular concepts to guide what we then look at in ANOVA to determine those relationships among the variables. Once we find all that, phase 4, and I have a time frame for you, then we go into phase 5. And phase 5 is when we start looking at longitudinal data and we have the full model put in place, is that we then find out how do we continuously improve the model, improve the research being done in the solar energy industry. So, slide 9. So what are we going to do? We have completed the variable list. We've been working on this for the past 18 months. All the individuals I've mentioned have provided input on those variables. We believe we're about 99% complete. These are realistic in terms of complete variables. If you're interested, I can send those to you. We have 319 that's representing those 5 concepts. I'll give you some more in terms of the next slide. Then we're going to centralize the current data. That takes time. In my experience, this large of a data set is going to take at least 6 months to a year, actually. Complete the CFAs, complete the SEM, and we're talking somewhere around December of 2017 or January of 2018 before we even start hitting the structural equation modeling. So this is something that's not going to be done overnight. But you're going to be providing recommendations, however, starting next year, December of 2016, and ongoing throughout the entire time of the center and obviously the Texas A&M site as well. So our primary research questions that we're going to be answering is what are the educational backgrounds, academic, business, both, etc., that impact most upon the collection technologies and the conversion technologies? What are the funding streams that impact upon the collection technologies and the conversion technologies? What collection technologies impact most upon the conversion technologies and costs, and what conversion technologies impact most upon the technology outcomes, the global imprint, and the costs? So to look at that in terms of the degree of specificity with some of the variables that are actually representing those concepts, going back to the original model, back in one of the early slides, is we have the technology, team, and funding variables as a concept. In our experience, they usually collapse into one concept: the collection technology variables, the conversion technology variables, the technology outcomes and global imprint. In our experience, typically you don't have 2 concepts that really kind of stand out by themselves, and on solar costs will obviously be one entire concept that we're going to be assessing as well. So just to finish in terms of some of the specifics, we've identified the team type and the funds. Just an example of the 319. Obviously, you have chemists and engineers, scientists and researchers, the researchers being individuals like myself. We need the balance of system techs, etc. And the funds, what kind of Department of Energy, energy efficiency and renewable energy funds are available. Not just funds, but also tax incentives. What kinds of things are out there? Sunshot initiatives, Department of Agriculture with rural energy funds that are available, the REAP funds, and NREL as well as state level and philanthropic. When we get into the technology of the collection of the solar energy, we're also looking at the mix. How can we put wind and solar together? Dr. Balog and I recently interacted with an individual who's looking at solar energy that is being collected on the actual wind turbines. And that's kind of way out there type of research, but you can do solar energy collection using paste, and those are the kinds of things that are already being done. The Fresnel lenses themselves, the parabolics, the types of tracking and concentrators that are available and already being assessed, we want to put all those together. In terms of conversion technology, where we've really concentrated on in the center so far, the mono and polycrystalline, the silicon, the gallium arsenide, cadmium telluride, etc. We want to put all of those in the conversion technology. The technology outcomes and the global imprint, what are some of the kilowatt hour efficiencies? What are some of the warranties that are involved? Do we have a 20-year battery life? Is it really 20 years? What kind of backup grid time do we have? Ease of use. We're going to be assessing some new types of questionnaires in terms of resident use. What would be best is a black box. We sell it. And in that black box, out pops the solar collection, and you plug it into the wall, and it provides you solar energy. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Well, it's not like that at the residential level. So ease of use is a type of assessment we would like to look at. Carbon imprint, transportation infrastructure. We have these wonderful electric cars, but they typically don't go over 500 miles at the very most if you go really, really slow, and then you got to set them up and give them some more juice. And so we need to look at that kind of framework as well. And the costs are very well known. We're going to differentiate in residential, business, and utility. And some of the insurance that goes along with that, unfortunately, we do have in the solar energy some of the issues with inversion and arc default and those kinds of fires that are unfortunately part of the newness of the industry, and Dr. Balog has looked at a lot of that. So that is the presentation. I know that we already have some questions coming up. So Jonathan, what I'm going to do is I'll read from Jen's. And Jen says, shouldn't tubular be part of the collection technology and not the conversion technology, since it refers to a structure and not a thin film or crystalline system? Great question. What we can do is, as we put this model in place, we're seeking input to make sure what we've done is valid and reliable as we put this in place. So to answer your question, great question, and it may be both. What we find out in the confirmatory factor analysis as we bring it to structural equation modeling is sometimes we find a variable that fits on both concepts. And so that may be one outcome, or it may actually be collection technology. And so that collection technology, as we create the structural equation modeling from the first confirmatory factor analysis, is that we might find out it loads on both, and that it may have an impact on the technology outcomes and solar costs so significantly that we need to put it in both, or it just falls into one. So that's kind of the art part of structural equation modeling. I hope that answers your question. I see Brian is typing away too. John, do we have the ability? Jen, yes, thank you. You're welcome. John, do we have the ability to listen from individuals who have phoned the chat?
Yes. If anyone is on the phone but isn't in the chat room, then feel free to speak up at this point, and just say your name first and ask a question if there's any that are available.
Just before that, Dr. Korgel just asked a question. What are your thoughts on community solar farms where individuals rent panels? Is this a way effectively lowering residential solar costs? Great question. I don't have an answer to that. Unfortunately, as a researcher, I am just, in 3 years, I've been able to come up to speed, but I'm not up to speed on everything. So we could definitely create that as a variable and collect that data to determine whether or not we find it to be effectively lowering those residential solar costs. So I'm not going to have an answer for all of these questions. Please believe me. I'm just honored to be working with all these chemists and engineers as a big data researcher. So unfortunately, Brian, I can't answer your question, but hey, let's put it in the model. I look forward to it. John, open the line then.
Okay, if there's anyone out there with a question, please feel free to unmute your phone and ask Russ.
So John, that means if there's no questions, I did so wonderful. Everybody understands nothing is understood. So I hope I go with the former. Let me ask this question to everybody. Why not do this? Is there anything from the folks out there that they can see as a potential downside to this? Because with big data, what I tell folks is this is not a panacea. This is not going to tell you everything you need to do in a nutshell. And in healthcare, we're all looking for that, that silver bullet medicine to provide us for long life and low cost. This is something that's only helpful. Research is supposed to be helpful. It's not the IRS. It actually does help. But in terms of helping us create this model and make it better, what are some of the things that you would either add to it or make sure that we don't stumble as we create this? Because again, working with the folks at the center, nobody else has seen this model in terms of doing it in solar, and in my understanding is the only one that brings all these together. And then I'll go to Jonathan's question for the students. I see Jen is typing. Jen, great question. Does the model only address terrestrial solar applications? Not necessarily. In working with Ruben up at Colorado School of Mines, his research has been, or at least in conjunction with others that do research on non-terrestrial or I'm not talking about intergalactic, but in terms of those that go beyond the terrestrial, and how could we look at the kinds of solar farms that provide it back to Earth with microwaves, or how could we help solar panels be more efficient in space for space exploration, or actually use solar energy maybe as an energy source for solar exploration. I'm a techie. I love solar. I love good old Star Trek. Maybe we can find solar energy as the means to propel us to the next galaxy. But to answer your question a little more terrestrially, working with the folks at Colorado School of Mines, some of their questions goes beyond the terrestrial solar applications. We did look at some of the literature, as I indicated, with the solar mines in space, and using microwaves as a mechanism to bring it back to Earth, and using that kind of energy. So sure, the model can be used there. It's a wonderful question. How we implement that within phase one, that would be the really interesting question. Maybe Jen, you can bring a company in and help us do that one within the center. That would be great. Let me go to the question from John. Question from the students here at UT. What are the next steps with the data that you collect in the model? So great question. We already have been putting funds into this model both at Texas A&M College Station and Texas A&M Central Texas, along with TEAS, to determine how this model might be done in stages. We are already starting to collect some data in our own solar research projects that will be part of the larger data. And more importantly, the piece that is usually lacking from big data is everybody concentrates on the data. We've also got to concentrate on the literature. And one of the most difficult things is for the students is, as they are either finding or they already know, is you've got to have the literature support what you're doing. You know, that's the reliability. You just can't rely on Russ Porter and Jeff Kirk and the rest of the folks that have been telling us what we need to do. We need to have the literature support us. So the question is, in terms of the next steps, is we have already dove into the literature to support what we're doing. As we bring the data online, once Texas A&M site is stood up, we want their particular data to be part of the big data, but also the literature that they provide. And so I'm answering you in two steps. One, we really need to have it front loaded with the literature, and that's where we already are. And as you know, as students, that takes a lot of time. So as we're working on the Texas A&M site to be part of the center, we're paralleling that with the literature review and also creating the infrastructure to have that amount of data all in one particular set. You know, I'm not just going to be putting this on my laptop and looking looking at it with the grad students and the postdocs and Dr. Kirk. We need to have that infrastructure in place, so we're still working on that. It looked like I had Dr. Kirk trying to call in. If he wants to call in, we still have a few moments. Jeff, I'll answer it on my phone if you were calling in about that. So, John, does that answer students' questions?
She's nodding her head yes. Thanks, Russ.
Yeah, and you know, if the students there want to be part of that literature review, we welcome it. You know, that takes a lot of time. So, John, I'm not getting any other questions. I think we may have covered all as well as any questions. Do you want to make one more request on the folks that called in?
Sure. If there's anyone out there on the phone line who hasn't had a chance and would like to ask Russ a question or anything of that nature, please feel free to speak up. Dr. Kirk, if you're able to get through, you can ask your question at this moment. Okay, well, it sounds like you've answered all the questions that we have now, and I just want to say thanks to Dr. Russ Porter for taking the time to present this presentation as a part of our seminar series. Russ, if you have any closing comments, please feel free to offer them.
Yes, I appreciate that opportunity. Again, thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to present this model. It is unique in the world of solar industry research. I appreciate the honor to be working with the center, even where we are, even though the Texas A&M site hasn't been officially established. We're looking forward to the NSF proposal going in. We did receive our letter of intent approval, and we are at the stage of meeting all the criteria, at least that we've been able to determine for the site to be stood up. We do have to do our due diligence and complete the proposal, and that will be going in before the deadline. Again, I want to thank all the center researchers, the site directors, the center director, Brian Korgel, and John for his logistics on this. I know it takes a lot to make this all come together. I do listen in to the folks that present during the other times. I'm usually, unfortunately, having to multitask because of my regular job. but I didn't obviously do it this time for obvious reasons. My last question for everybody, as the presenter, I get to ask questions too, is think about why we're doing this. You know, it's a wonderful opportunity to do research that makes the quality of life for individuals better. But I think we have to really think even more in depth on why we're doing this, especially for those folks who weren't able to call in or be part of the presentation as you listen to this as it was recorded. As that we go forward, we really have to ask ourselves not only why solar is going to be helpful in the future as an energy source, but should we even continue to be using the energy sources that we're currently using? I'm not a tree hugger. You know, I love trees, but I also cut them down because I'd rather look at a book instead of online because my eyes go red after looking at computers for so long. But the reality of it is, we are depleting our ozone level. We are looking at the globe as a small speck of dust is the only place that we're living on right now. You know, maybe we'll get to the extraterrestrial solar applications in a generation or so, but it could be next year. Who knows? But I would ask you, as you think about types of research that you're going to be interested in, and this is really going to the students, is how you can help this model and help this center really answer the questions as to why we're doing solar energy research. I have really focused my time on the solar energy research, pulling away from the healthcare and the education to really concentrate on this because I think this is something that I can give my grandchildren that will help them in their quality of life. I do go back to the education and healthcare whenever I can, but in terms of really looking at what we're going to hand our generations to come, we've got to ask more difficult questions than we've been doing. And the technology that we've been using is over 100 years old. It's a blink of an eye in geological time. But if we don't pay attention to our geological question, we're going to be a blink of an eye as a human species if we don't do something about our planet. And so I think this is one small piece of that. It's a great grandstand that I like to get on. I did it at the Colorado State University meeting, but I think it's an important question that we all have to ask. So thank you, everybody. Everybody have a great evening.
Thanks again, Russ. We appreciate it.
Take care.